This is the confirmation makeup for grade 9 for October 27th, 2013. This week, we started off by remembering that God made us to be happy. If you remember, in the first lesson, we talked about the church's documents, which say man has been created by God for a blissful purpose beyond the reach of earthly misery. We talked about Thomas Aquinas, writing 800 years ago, who said, God made us to be happy. I mentioned this week that the Baltimore Catechism, which is one of the most super traditional, uber Catholic books ever, which was used for a very long time to teach the faith in the United States, which most of your grandparents probably used the Baltimore Catechism when they were kids. It says God made us to be happy. God made us to be happy, a very important point. The question is, how do we go ahead and be happy? Because we know it's not as simple as just having a good day or getting those fancy new toys or even falling in love. All these things are great, but their joy kind of starts to fade little by little. So how do we be happy? Well, part of the answer to this question is exemplified really well in the life of one of the most important saints in the history of the church, St. Augustine, who lived in the 300s. It's not really the picture of Augustine I'm going for, though. That's a little closer, but still not quite right. That's what I'm looking for. That's Augustine. You see, Augustine was a person who was raised to be Christian by his very devout mother. But when he hit his teenage years, he got into the ultimate, live for the moment, just have fun, almost what you'd call today that lifestyle that everybody seems to say, or a lot of people seem to say, this is what college is all about. Party, fun, everything. And he really did have just about everything. This is a guy, he had the money. He had the girls. He had friends. And he didn't just have all the young stuff. I mean, today in our culture, again, people say that as young people, when we're young, we should just have fun, party. But when we're older, we should settle down, have this really good American lifestyle is the way that we hear about it being said. And Augustine had that too. He had a great career and that special someone, and he had a son. So he had everything. But in the end, he wasn't happy. Now, he wasn't miserable. But all of those things faded away. The happiness from money, or fun, or hanging out, or friends, or all the women he was with, a different one every day. Passing happiness, moments of enjoyment, but nothing that lasts. And then the more lasting things, or the things we would consider more lasting, that special someone, this person that he would have said was the one, that special someone who to spend his life with, a child. These weren't it either. Yeah, sure, there was goodness in them, but they didn't bring him that lasting fulfillment. Augustine found, when he finally came back to God, through years and decades of his mother praying for him, he found that in God he found fulfillment. He said, in every heart there is a God-shaped hole, and we are never fulfilled until it's full. Augustine found what we believe as Catholics, that we're not called just to an earthly happiness. Yeah, it's great to be happy because we've had a good day, or we have nice things, or we have good relationships. But we're really called, we're made by God for a happiness that goes beyond that. for a supernatural happiness. And how do we find that supernatural happiness? Well, what Augustine found is that it's through love. But not that kind of love. No, that kind of love. Jesus said that there's no greater love than this, that a man should lay down his life for his friends. Love. Real love. Not the fluffy love, which is fine and good. But the love we're called to, the love which brings about happiness, is self-giving. Willing the good of another, being faithful to God and truth and conscience. You see, we're made as a people of community. God is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. He's a community, as it were. He's not just a part of one, he is one. And so we're made in his image. We're made to be relational, to have connections to other people. Love, the giving of myself to another person, is part of that. And the great thing is that we're made to receive love too. So we're made to receive the self-giving of others. That's what makes things like friendships, like falling in love, so great. Because we're made to give all of ourselves and to receive all of another person. That's how God made us. And when we're living that way, we'll find happiness. In particular, when we're receiving God's love, all of God, and giving back to God all that he has given us. When that happens, we find that supernatural happiness that we're really called to. And so this is why God's given us his commandments, his rules, if you want to put it that way. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Don't lie. Do go to Mass. All the things we'll talk about throughout the year. It's because God made us. He knows us. He knows what will make us happy. He knows what we need to do in order to love. And he knows what we need to do in order to sin. Sin is a refusal to love. It's putting oneself first in a radical way. It's when we offend God or our neighbor or truth or conscience. All the commandments, all the things God says, you ought to do this and you ought not do this. Is it because he's going to judge us and we'll be held accountable for doing evil or rewarded for doing good? Well, yes, that's all very true. And we really need to consider that and respect that fact. But it's also just because God knows how we work. And he wants us to be happy. If I kill a man, I'm not going to be happy. If I go around committing adultery, falling into the kinds of just sexual promiscuity Augustine did, well, just like Augustine, I'm not going to be happy if I'm not an honest person. I might get moments of joy from it by getting away with something here or there, but in the end, I'm not going to be happy. No, if I love, I'll be happy. If I give myself, if I will the good of another person, if I'm faithful to God, truth, and conscience, I'll be happy. And if I don't, if I sin, I'm going to find everything from just my life falling apart to even just that consistent unfulfillment, that there's something more, there's something missing, that Augustine felt. Of course, this is very easily said, but how is it done? Loving is hard. Giving ourselves is really hard, and putting ourselves first is really easy. Well, fortunately, as Catholics, we also have something else that we turn to, the virtues. Virtues were things which were come up with by philosophers before Christ, people like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates, people who didn't even necessarily believe in God or necessarily believe certainly in the God that the Jews did or that Jesus would talk about. No, but they talk about the virtues as a way by which people could be happy. And as Catholics, we look to virtues as a way by which we can grow and become stronger people so that we can love and not sin. And so virtues are a habitual disposition to good. That's all it is. It just means when I habitually, that is usually, am doing good, am disposed to a particular good. So if I'm usually courageous whenever I'm faced with something challenging or scary, well, then I have the virtue of courage. Virtues are different from values. If I say I value courage, well, that means it's important to me. But if I just go ahead and run from things every time I'm a little afraid, I could still value courage and think it's important, but I certainly don't have courage. No, a virtue is when we have something, is when we practice something, when we are habitually disposed to that thing. In particular, there's 7 virtues that as Catholics we think are important. 4 of them we call the cardinal virtues because they order everything else. Cardinal means numbering. These virtues kind of number or order all the other virtues: justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. They help any other virtue we could possibly hope to follow work. And then there's the theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. We call them theological because they're about God. So, the virtues. Virtues are habitual dispositions to good, and they're always opposed by vices. By one vice of not having enough of what makes that virtue good, and by one vice of having too much. So justice is the virtue of giving to another person what he is due. It means you give someone what he's owed, what he deserves. If I don't give somebody as much as he deserves, that's a vice, that's fraud. If I give him too much, more than he deserves, for some illegitimate reason, well, that's favoritism. Prudence means that I set my end goal in mind when I make decisions. So if my end goal is to pass a test, and I'm faced with the decision to study or to party, the prudent thing to do, well, is to study. If I don't have enough, I'm careless. If I am way too concerned about doing everything perfectly to the point where it's not even helpful, well, I'm scrupulous. Fortitude is just perseverance, sticking things out when it's tough. Not having enough of that is being timid, giving up too easily. Of course, we could also go too far and be stubborn and never quit, even when it's just not even helpful anymore. Finally, temperance means moderation. It means doing things in a reasonable amount. Having too little of it is false asceticism. That means saying that something is completely bad and we should never do any of it. I'll never have a single cookie because it's bad to even have one cookie. Even a bite of a cookie is too much. Well, that's ridiculous. On the other hand, being a glutton and eating 25 cookies in an hour, well, that's no good either. No, we should be moderate. And then there's faith, hope, and charity. Faith, believing in God. Hope, wanting God. Charity, loving God. These theological virtues don't have excesses because God is infinite. You can't ever believe, hope, or love in God too much. So that's our lesson for this week. God made us to be happy. But we find that no matter what we have in life, like Augustine, we're not completely happy. There's always a little bit of a question, is there more? And that's because we're made for that supernatural happiness. And it's also because a lot of times we sin and impact our own happiness on earth and put ourselves in a position where we're going to be less happy. God calls us to love by loving, giving of ourselves, and receiving love, receiving others' self-giving. That leads us to happiness, here and in the life to come. And lastly, we can practice our virtues: justice, prudence, fortitude, temperance, faith, hope, and charity, by trying to practice these things, by being disposed to these goods most of the time, as often as possible. We grow stronger, we love more, we sin less. And what's more, these are easy things to think about. They're general. Give to another what's due. I can apply that in many situations. I don't need to have a specific commandment about that. So, encourage you this week to think about how you can live the virtues more and how we can become less selfish and more self-giving. That's the lesson for this week, for October the 27th, 2013. God bless.